In the world of Vampire the Masquerade, diablerie is considered by many to be the worst thing a vampire can do. This is the act of drinking another vampire's blood to the point of killing them, through which the diablerist will consume their soul and some portion of their power. For most vampire society, this is a crime punishable by death. The diablerist's aura is visibly marked and blackened by the deed, and a permanent price is paid on their humanity. After all, the annihilation of another's soul is an inherently evil act. Diablerie is also how Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 begins, when the player's elder vampire character awakens in frenzy after a century-long slumber to consume the one who woke them. And after 2 playthroughs of this long-awaited sequel to one of my favourite RPGs of all time, this is the word I find myself coming back to. Diablerie. To drink of another's essence so entirely that nothing is left. As what better metaphor is there to describe this game? That might seem a little harsh, because it is. In truth, this game can be enjoyable. Its combat, story, and presentation are all largely serviceable, and sometimes good, and there is fun that can be had with them. Probably not enough to justify the current asking price, nor to say that this game in any way lives up to its name, and for once, the cries of "not a real RPG" are largely true. But there is an okay game underneath all of this that I'm sure some will find worth playing. And maybe that is to be how this game will ultimately be remembered. Bloodlines 2. A bad sequel and bad RPG, but if you can look past this, it's a fun little vampire game unfairly hurt by a poor choice of name and overly high expectations. I guess then, I'm just someone who can't look past this. I have waited 20 years for this game, and I don't wait for many sequels. Not really. I see games get announced, years can pass, and sometimes they arrive or sometimes they don't. But life goes on, and in that life I have never once felt I was close to running out of games I want to play. There are sequels I look forward to, but I don't wait for them. Yet, there are rare exceptions. So rare I could count them on one hand with fingers to spare, that I guess my heart does yearn for. And Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is one of them. It has always been one of them. But not anymore. So please forgive me a little harshness. In truth, it would be hard to feign surprise that this game ended up disappointing. The writing was on the wall in bold underlined text and illuminated by spotlights. Yet, somehow, here I am, surprised and disappointed both. Not because this game is so bad it forever tarnishes the original's legacy. It's not that bad, and I'm not even sure that's how legacies work. No, this isn't really about how this game fails. It does, but that's not the part that gets me. It's that it didn't even try. And someone is responsible for that. So this is more like a murder mystery. And I think I know who the killer is. In 1991, White Wolf Publishing released Vampire the Masquerade, which became the first in the World of Darkness series of tabletop RPGs. It was marketed with the tagline, "A storytelling game of personal horror." And these words give a glimpse at what made it special. By the 90s, horror RPGs weren't new, but Vampire the Masquerade wasn't a game about hunting or escaping vampires, it was about being them. This is what drove its success, and success it found. Vampire was everything D&D wasn't. Dark, modern, relatable, adult, edgy, accessible in rules, lighter on numbers, and on the ascendancy compared to D&D's stark commercial decline in this era. To borrow a phrase, it was what the culture was feeling. And for a time, it seemed like it might even overtake the usually untouchable king of tabletop RPGs. This didn't happen, but for such a rising star, video game adaptations were inevitable. The first released for PC in the year 2000. Vampire the Masquerade Redemption was largely successful, and its strong sales encouraged its publisher to pursue a sequel. At the same time as this, struggling but acclaimed developer Troika Games approached Activision with a pitch to create a first-person RPG out of a desire to breathe new life into a now declining computer role-playing genre. It was Activision that suggested using the Vampire license, and so, in November 2004, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines released, to become one of gaming's most infamous examples of a great game that completely flopped. The story of Bloodlines' failure is one that's been told many times before, including by me, but it would be unfair not to repeat it, even if only to remind people just how unfairly this game was treated. Troika were a small studio. In 2004, they had a total of 32 employees, not all of which were even game developers. Bloodlines also didn't have a long development. While work officially began in late 2001, this occurred alongside the development of the Temple of Elemental Evil, which didn't release until September 2003, leaving just 14 months for the studio to solely focus on Bloodlines. And yet, November 2004 wasn't even meant to be the release date. Bloodlines was once scheduled for spring 2005, but Activision intervened to pull the game forward. The date chosen was the 16th of November, because this was the earliest possible date Bloodlines was contractually allowed to be released, owing to a stipulation made by Valve that no Source Engine game could come out before their own Source Engine project. And so, Bloodlines arrived on the very same day as quite possibly the biggest PC release of the decade. Half-Life 2 overshadowed the smaller title, and PC RPGs were already struggling in this period, with most successes only coming from games that also released on the then more dominant consoles. And so, Bloodlines' sales were weak, its reviews were mixed due to frequent bugs and technical problems that a rushed development led to, and Troika Games were forced to shut down just 3 months later. There was once an overused and then parodied phrase used in titles and thumbnails on YouTube, which said, "Game title didn't just die, it was murdered." And that phrase makes me think of Bloodlines. Because how else can you describe this game's treatment? Usually, there is a feeling that games fail due to incompetence, even when there is corporate interference. After all, corporations like profit, and successful games make more money, so it's not like corporations have any reason to want their games to fail. With Bloodlines, however, it almost feels malicious. It was murdered. But the irony here is that it didn't just die. The closure of Troika meant the studio was not able to patch and support Bloodlines post-release, and so the community, and in particular modder Werner Spall or Wesp5, stepped up to perform this role in their absence. The result was years and years worth of bug fixes and restored content, with the unofficial patch coming to be seen as the necessary way to experience the game and even coming pre-installed on GOG. And while fans worked on fixing Bloodlines' bugs, word of mouth made its reputation undying. Look to any decent list of greatest RPGs, and Bloodlines will be there. And as time has stretched, its acclaim has only grown. Bloodlines was once Troika's worst-selling game, but today it's easily their best known. Its reputation far outshines Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, despite selling less copies, and it's likely played a key role in maintaining interest in the tabletop game that created it. Speaking of which, Vampire the Masquerade also experienced unlife in the 2000s. Following declining sales and a controversial reboot in 2004, White Wolf Publishing were acquired by EVE Online developer CCP Games in 2006. For gaming fans, this might have seemed like a promising development, and a World of Darkness MMO was soon announced, but despite years of updates, developer time, and even a few rare trailers and gameplay teasers, this MMO never arrived, and nor did any other World of Darkness game during CCP's tenure. But in 2015, the beacons of hope would be lit once more when renowned and then actually well-liked strategy game developer Paradox Interactive acquired White Wolf and all World of Darkness IPs, of which a producer at Paradox later said they saw Bloodlines as the crown jewel. Unsurprisingly, it didn't take long for a Bloodlines 2 to follow. Shortly after the acquisition deal, Hardsuit Labs and one of Bloodlines' lead writers, Brian Mitsoda, would successfully pitch a sequel to Paradox. And so, development began, with an official announcement arriving in early 2019.
This city will bleed you dry. You're young. You'll fight over scraps. Here, no one's hands stay clean. You will come to despise it as much as I do. But I've waited so long to see it again.
After so many years of longing and misplaced hope, this announcement was surreal. And with a release date of early 2020, it almost felt too good to be true.
You're obviously new to this whole existence, but truth is, most of you types won't even make it a whole year. So you probably figured out that you need to drink blood. You can't just do whatever you want. Cities are carved up by political factions. Never tell anyone about what you are. See, vampires are extremely territorial. Unwittingly poach in someone's territory and suddenly whip! We have one rule. You don't break the masquerade.
And it was. Despite playable demos at E3 and Gamescom in 2019, and marketing promising all the right things, 2020 only brought a never-ending onslaught of bad news. First came a small delay in late 2019, then came the confusing announcement that highly regarded RPG writer Chris Avellone was no longer working on the project following later retracted sexual harassment allegations. Followed by another delay in August 2020, followed soon by a true bombshell announcement that narrative lead Brian Mitsoda and creative director Martin Clooney had been fired. Paradox Interactive did not provide any explanation for why, including, apparently, to Mitsoda himself, who said that this came as a complete shock to him and that he'd never been given any reason to believe there was issues with his work on the project. In a blog post in 2025, Mitsoda reaffirmed this, saying he still never received a reason and never heard from Paradox again. Soon after this, the other senior narrative designer working on the game, Cara Ellison, was reported to have left, before further delays were announced in December. And then finally, in February 2021, a final nail was driven into any stubbornly lingering hope, as Paradox announced that they had removed developer Hardsuit Labs from the game entirely, leaving only vague statements of collaboration with a new partner, alongside shattered, fading dreams. When Bloodlines 2 awoke from its 2-year torpor, it was a different game. Some parts might have looked familiar. The first-person perspective, the Seattle at Christmas setting, character designs, art assets, even some of the text used in trailers, but looks can be misleading. This latest iteration was built on a new engine, with a new codebase, new gameplay, a new story focused on experiencing an elder vampire power fantasy that had no connection and was almost narratively opposite the thin blood mass embrace story of the previous version, and also no returning developers. This version instead came from Dear Esper and Still Wakes for Deep developer, The Chinese Room, a studio with a proven record of success, but also known for making narrative-focused experiences light on gameplay, i.e. walking sims. It is this version that can be played and judged today, and despite its lack of similarities to the original 2004 title, the scars left by its troubled development can still be found on every inch of its skin. The game we have is a product of where it came from. It reflects the Chinese Room's legitimate talents, Paradox Interactive's desperation and greed, and a project torn between different studios, different identities, and different objectives. Much of this game feels like it exists out of obligation, and it's not that hard to see where those obligations come from. And so, it's with the earlier Hard Suit Labs version of the game where the biggest mysteries lie, and they are mysteries that seem likely to remain. Generally, there are two competing stances people seem to take. The first is to look at the released Bloodlines 2 as a disappointment, and long for the game we didn't get for what it could have been. Many have drawn attention to features Bloodlines 2 lacks, and those are all features this older version had. Lockpicking, guns, inventories, upgrades, character skills and stats, non-linear level design, detailed dialogue choices, humanity levels, frenzy mechanics, and, of course, dancing. This version of Bloodlines was an RPG, and even if it can't be proven to have been a good one, at least that must count for something. The other perspective is to again look at the released Bloodlines 2 as a disappointment, and then question how bad the original version must have been if it was deemed even worse and considered not good enough to finish despite years of financial investment. There are questions over this aborted game that will always stay unanswered, but there is some evidence for you to judge yourself. People did play it via a demo, and footage of these demos still exists online. You can still read media previews expressing excitement for many things, as well as concerns over things like combat. You can still see frame rate dips in footage despite the fact it should be running on the most powerful hardware available. You can still see janky combat animations and overly static dialogue. You can still see the not quite terrible but noticeable dislike ratio on these videos from a time when YouTube dislikes were real. And you can still see a game that has so much more in common with the original Bloodlines than the game we ultimately received. Personally, I believe there is a stance which makes more sense, and one actor here who deserves the blame. But that is getting ahead of ourselves, and why speculate about the game we didn't get when we can just play the one we did? I have a history of pushing back against the claim that certain games are not actually RPGs. And there is evidence of this here, on this channel, across multiple videos spanning multiple years. The reason for this is because when people say a game is not an RPG, they're not usually following any consistent definition, but instead simply wish to communicate that they think something is bad. And some things are bad, but the more accurate statement should then be that it is a bad RPG, because genres aren't just descriptors of quality. I say all this because this is the first time I think those oft-said words are largely true. By most definitions of the term, I do not see how Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is an RPG. I suppose then it is necessary to define this term, which is something I have done before in detail, but the simple version is that they are games which combine a focus on player characters, with this being the quality that separated Dungeons & Dragons from the strategy and war games that came before it, with statistical rules and gameplay, or systems, with this being the common feature shared between all the very different games people might call an RPG to this day. Action RPGs, then, are almost by definition less RPG-like than non-action RPGs because they combine gameplay based on statistical rules with gameplay based on action, thus diluting one of the two defining features of the genre. Bloodlines 2 claims to be an action RPG, but its systems are so shallow, or fake, or absent that I don't see how this meets the necessary criteria. Of course, genres are spectrums and lines always blur, but Bloodlines 2 does less than many other games which generally aren't considered RPGs. All this might seem overly pedantic. After all, whether a game is or isn't an RPG is not a descriptor of quality. But it stops being pedantry when a game is claiming to be something it isn't. Bloodlines 2 was marketed as an RPG. It says as much on storefronts and the official webpage, and people were surely influenced to buy this game by this claim. So it does feel relevant to discussing it. It also says something about a game when it's pretending to be something it isn't. But let's explore Bloodlines 2's RPG-ness in more detail so I can back this accusation up with evidence. The game begins with a choice of gender, but there's no other character creation at the moment than this. You play as the Nomad, which makes it strange that this screen and early subtitles refers to you as the Sleeper. To my knowledge, this alias is never used again, and your character soon picks an additional name for themselves in Fire, with a PH, which they seem to take from a nearby band poster. I'm not sure why this many names were needed, but it's a shame the player can't pick at least one of them, because then maybe we could have avoided playing as Fire the Vampire. In fact, I have to wonder if this poster explanation was simply added at a later date to try and address fan criticism of this name at a time when that criticism had become obvious, but it was too late to actually rewrite it. Regardless, Fire's not alone because they're accompanied by a voice in their head called Fabian. You soon discover that Fire is an elder vampire, older and thus in theory more powerful than any other vampire in this city by quite some margin. At the start of the game, they awaken from a century-long torpor, basically vampire hibernation, that leaves them blood-starved and unable to control themselves. Fabian was the one who discovered them, which led to him being diablerized, and explains how they come to be in Fire's head, which is an unusual but not impossible side effect of this. Fabian doesn't seem to hold his soul annihilation against you, however, and acts as your friendly guide for the rest of the game. After this opening tutorial, Fabian asks the player more questions which serve as the rest of character creation. You can pick a backstory from 2 choices of 3 options, which really don't matter, and you can even just decline, and which clan you belong to, which does have more of an impact. In Vampire the Masquerade, clans are basically vampiric family lineages, or bloodlines. Members of the same clan share similar characteristics and abilities they inherit from the one who embraced them. In Bloodlines 2, you have a choice of 6, which all affect which 4 combat abilities you unlock first, as well as granting one single unique clan passive. For example, for Tremere, the Blood Mage-themed clan, which was the first I played as, your clan passive causes bodies to dissolve after being fed on, which, after an entire playthrough, I am still not sure what the benefit of this is meant to be. Maybe it's intended to be a stealth thing, maybe to prevent enemies from discovering bodies, but I've never noticed that being a problem on other characters, and something stealth-related doesn't seem to fit the magic-themed Tremere. This passive and your basic attack animation are the only things which make each clan unique. So I bet people are glad to choose Tremere for that sweet enemy bodies sometimes despawn faster perk. Other passives are more useful, but not more interesting. You have increased melee damage after feeding, actions are silent after feeding, decreased damage after feeding, become harder to see after feeding, and increased move speed, also, take a guess, after feeding. But at least most of these fit their clan. Clans also have 4 connected combat abilities, but you can soon learn all abilities regardless of clan choice, so this only impacts which abilities you start with. There are also rare moments when an NPC might acknowledge your clan during dialogue. This is just for flavor and doesn't impact the story or quest design in any way, which would be fine if clans were a very minor part of Vampire the Masquerade's lore. Clans, however, are kind of a big deal, so not only is this a missed opportunity for some genuine reactivity that could make the player's choice of clan actually matter, but it can also feel jarringly immersion-breaking. On my second playthrough, I chose Clan La Sombra, who, in the time that Fire has been asleep, have switched sides in a century-spanning power struggle involving most of vampire society, from the more extremist Sabbat to their mortal enemy, the Camarilla, who are the most dominant vampire sect. And to the game's credit, this is actually mentioned early on.
I suppose you won't have heard. So let me be the first, child of La Sombra, to inform you that your clan is welcome surprise. But you...
But this is all the mention it gets. Fire has no reaction or acknowledgement to this, and the conversation just continues on after as it would for any other character. And it's not just La Sombra. As Tremere, you can hear that the Tremere Pyramid has been destroyed. And again, there is no reaction or chance to respond, and I assume there are similar examples to this on other clans. I'm only mentioning these 2 as they're the 2 I played. To put the importance of these events into perspective, this is a bit like going to sleep as an American during the Cold War and waking up several years later to find out that America has switched sides and joined the USSR. Or for the Tremere example, it's a bit like going to sleep as an American and waking up to find out America is gone. These events are so massive they demand acknowledgement. But instead, the clan-specific dialogue is limited to singular, infrequent, and inconsequential throwaway lines, either said by an NPC with no reaction from Fire, or occasionally by Fire with no reaction from the NPC. The final part of character creation is access to an appearance menu that unlocks after the tutorial, where you can choose between 5 different hairstyles, shared between genders, and makeup, jewelry, and eye color options. This is a small number of options, particularly if you don't care about makeup or jewelry, as I imagine some male characters don't. Finally, there is an outfit system, tied to combat abilities, where each ability you unlock grants 1 linked gender-neutral outfit. This isn't a logical or thematic way to get new outfits, unlike, say, walking into a shop and buying them, but seeing as there's no money, loot, or bartering in this game, I guess they had to be connected to something. Annoyingly, this means you can't preview outfits before spending ability points, making acquiring them feel a bit like opening a loot box after each new ability, where you probably just get something you don't want. Outfits are purely cosmetic, so it's hard to understand why players aren't just given access to all of them to provide as much choice as possible. Otherwise, you might find yourself playing as a Tremere and wandering around snowy Seattle for the opening hours in nothing but an oversized t-shirt and tights, looking like the type of guy who still tries to date high school girls despite being in their 30s. Given how little character creation matters, you might hope dialogue choices make up for this, and you do get dialogue choices. Bloodlines 2 follows the Mass Effect or Fallout 4 approach of paraphrasing your options to make them easily readable, but unlike Fallout 4, it doesn't limit itself by always arbitrarily presenting the same number of choices. This is what caused Fallout's yes, grumpy yes, sarcastic yes, and maybe later problem. Instead, Bloodlines 2 will gladly use only 2 or 3 options when that makes sense, and it is better for it. Yet, it does still follow a template. In a dev diary explaining the dialogue system, it's claimed their approach to writing these choices comes from the player's role as an elder vampire. Age is almost everything for a vampire, so an elder can demand respect and throw their weight around, Or, at the other extreme, you can instead stroke people's pride with flattery and whisper honeyed lies. Much like the shape of McDonald's chicken nuggets, only 2 variants seem suspicious, and so a third was then added by way of a cautious, non-committal middle ground. And all this sounds fine, but having a choice between 3 archetypes of nice, rude, and neutral is hardly some groundbreaking or uniquely elder vampire idea. Not to brag, but I have been nice, rude, and neutral in RPGs before. Still, to the Chinese Room's credit, these archetypes are largely implemented, and the paraphrasing is competent. The problem with dialogue choices is that they don't change anything. If you've only played this game once, or just seen footage and reviews, this might surprise you. Because how could these dialogue choices not matter when text constantly appears at the top of the screen telling you people are impressed, flattered, irritated, embarrassed, and so on? In fact, in the lead up to this game's release, the reputation system was one of its most praised systems. And it didn't just promise that NPCs would react to the player's choices, but also that they would remember the type of choices you've previously made to build an image of your personality and then react if you do something unexpected. The example given is that if you're usually rude but then suddenly act nice, someone might assume you're being sarcastic and still have a negative reaction. This is a claim seen in these dev diaries and repeated in media previews and excited forum posts, but based on 2 playthroughs, I'm not sure this ever happened to me. It's hard to say definitively, because this involves not just making different choices, but also keeping a record of expected responses. And even in a game that allows you to save and load, this would be a difficult thing to test. One thing that's easy to test though is whether dialogue choices change anything. And on that, I can definitively say they don't. On my first playthrough, I reacted to these constant pop-ups by trying to be agreeable and say what people wanted to hear. You could argue this has a negative effect on any role-playing because it encourages the player to overly metagame dialogue, but what is dialogue but a social game anyway? So I wouldn't mind this if it still produced some actual consequences. On my second playthrough, however, I just wanted to do everything differently, and so chose all the opposite options. Being rude, refusing orders, lying to princes, getting caught lying, still being rude. One time I even tried to kill someone. I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but in one major main story choice, you have the option of teaming up with someone or destroying them. On my first playthrough, I chose team up. On my second, I went destroy. And what happens is exactly the same. What you choose in dialogue does not matter, and I've only found 4 exceptions to this in the entire game. One is in the second boss fight, where certain options can make the subsequent fight slightly easier. The other 3 are all towards the end of the game and are what determines your ending. Of these, 2 of them only impact the post-game ending slides, but the third does also change later dialogue and one minor quest. Yet these are the only times I found choices with consequences. As for the reputation system, it does not matter. One thing reputation doesn't impact is romance. This game does have 6 romance options, which are the 6 clan trainers who teach you new abilities. If you unlock all of their abilities, you can ask them to sleep with you, or whatever vampires do, and then there's a fade to black with nothing to see or hear, and then the romance is complete. So don't blink or you'll miss it. Literally, it happened to me on stream when I thought I was just unlocking an ability quickly and suddenly somehow my consent had been violated. I think. I'm not sure I blinked. I've played many RPGs, and you often find this sort of smoke and mirrors where games, even some of the best, make their choices seem more impressive than they truly are. For example, a game might give you regular dialogue options, and only some of them actually change things, but you don't know which, and so are forced to react as if all of them might, and can be left with the impression that your choices mattered more than they actually did. If you pull back the curtain by reloading to test things, or by looking at a dialogue flowchart in an editor, these tricks become less impressive, but you were the one who pulled that curtain back. In this way, Bloodlines 2 is not so different, as its smoke and mirrors can easily still create a believable illusion, evidently good enough to fool some people. Usually, however, there is something real underneath all the tricks. One major reason Bloodline 2's illusions are so effective is that there's no manual save system in this game. Instead, the game has one autosave that updates regularly when you do things, as well as separate saves at the start of each chapter. This means you can't just reload to test different dialogue options, or to test compatibilities and outfits. This can also cause problems if something goes wrong with that one autosave, as happened to streamer Carnage, forcing him to entirely stop playing the game. This is a pretty severe downside, although luckily I have found bugs to actually be rare. Still, when I say this game has one autosave, I mean it. It doesn't have one per character, it has one. And so, if you create a new character while another is partway through a chapter, it will overwrite your autosave and you'll lose progress, something which happened to me. Although, to be fair, the game did at least try to warn me. Still, this makes simultaneous playthroughs hugely inconvenient as you can only switch between characters at the end of chapters. You'd expect most games like this to support a more user-friendly system, but surely for an RPG, it's a problem if the save system doesn't even support multiple characters. Hopefully, these examples show that the role-playing side of this experience is less than it might initially seem. But there is one final problem trying to play as Fire presents. Voiced main characters in RPGs can sometimes be harder to see as your own character because their voice might be different to how you envisioned them. This can be a barrier to role-playing, and the same problem can arise from defined appearances, or fixed backstories, or sometimes just the way dialogue is written. In Bloodlines 2, Fire is voiced, but they're not even the only voiced character in your head. Fabian is also there, often talking and sometimes having a back and forth with Fire with no player input at all, making it feel less like this is your character and more like you're just tagging along as an awkward third wheel. But this isn't the only way Bloodlines 2 limits your ability to embody this character. While you can make superficial choices to define small parts of your backstory, Fire's identity as the Nomad is out of your control, and a lot of people you meet have heard of the Nomad, making the player feel like the only one who doesn't know who they are. The story premise of an elder vampire waking up 100 years later can also lead to disconnect. Unlike with a newly turned vampire story where the player and their character are discovering this new vampiric world together, here, Fire knows everything about their past and vampires, but nothing about modern life, while the player knows everything about modern life, but nothing about fire or vampires. There's such a strong sense of being on different pages due to this premise and how it's handled. Yet I do think the idea of role-playing as an elder vampire is an interesting one. This is something which the Chinese Room said was the main driving force behind completely abandoning the narrative of the first iteration of this game, which cast players at the other end of the vampire power and respect spectrum. Still, even if this is a solid idea, this story does not provide an elder vampire experience. After Fire wakes up, they find themselves with a mysterious mark on their hand that greatly limits their power. This feels like a convenient way to make the player work to get their abilities back, like Samus at the start of a Metroid game, which could fulfill the objective of normal RPG progression. In reality, character progression here is mostly finished after 4 or 5 hours when you unlock your 4th combat ability, as after this, the only things left to unlock are the other clan variants of these abilities to swap to, and one minor perk for each clan if you complete the set. There's no loot, leveling, skills, equipment, or numbers, just 4 combat abilities you unlock in a linear order, and then 5 more alternative sets of 4 you get to mix and match. So progression is not this game's focus, and instead the mark exists for narrative purposes. It's there to stop you from having Elder Vampire power, so that the story can then do the exact opposite of providing an Elder Vampire role-playing experience. Initially, this may not be apparent. After waking up, you go meet former Camarilla Prince of Seattle, Lou Graham, and then current Prince, Ryong Choi, as Camarilla traditions do mandate that vampires must present themselves to the ruler of any domain they enter. Seeing as Fire woke up in a frenzy and proceeded to go on a killing spree, it's also likely this violated the Masquerade, which is a highly enforced tenet in vampire society that vampires must not reveal their identity to normal mortals in order to prevent widespread mortal backlash. Therefore, Fire is caught on the back foot, so to speak, and so even if the lack of respect anyone shows to an elder is surprising, Bloodlines 2 could still be given a pass for falling back on the familiar trope of turning the player into an errand boy as an excuse for quest design during its early hours. And yet, it doesn't just rely on this for its early hours. After making your introductions, you find out that Seattle is in chaos. The last prince has been assassinated, low-ranking anarchs are rebelling, and the ruling Camarilla court are incompetent. The player is roped in to find and deal with Benny, the current sheriff, who should be the court's chief enforcer but has instead gone rogue. And Fire does deal with them, in a surprisingly fun and hype-inducing boss fight, where you're then given a choice of turning Benny over to the still law-abiding de facto anarch leader, Katsumi, or the Camarilla prince, Ryong. So here we get to choose which of the 2 main factions to work with, is what I might say if this were a good RPG. Instead, if you give Benny to Katsumi, Ryong is mad at you, and so she makes you the new sheriff as punishment. And if you give Benny to Ryong, Ryong is pleased with you, and so she makes you the new sheriff as a reward. Because free will is but a delusion of the feeble mind of man. You can't decline this offer. Believe me, I tried on both characters because I didn't realize just how linear this game is, and because there's no reason I would want my character to go along with this. Being sheriff to this shit show of a court seems like a terrible idea. It brings you more enemies and responsibility for other people's mistakes, while keeping you busy running other people's errands and so unable to investigate the mark on your hand and the clearly more important events happening behind the scenes. And just in case you thought maybe it's not so bad and that this is just part of the story's master plan, the very next mission proves otherwise. Here you have to go back to Lou, someone with no actual standing or authority over you, who forces you to work for her lackey, who forces you to do their job for them of finding potential wealthy humans out in the streets for Lou to drink. This quest comes off as filler, designed to show the complete lack of respect Fire receives. And after this, you go run errands for other various vampires, which to some extent is how you spend the rest of the game. As a lowly, subservient lackey, there to run errands and play whipping boy for people younger, dumber, and weaker than you, who you can regularly be rude to, but are still forced to always serve and go along with without any hint of actual agency. It's one thing to create a linear story. It's another to create a linear story that is diametrically opposed to the narrative's apparent main objective of being some elder vampire power fantasy. The idea of role-playing as this character might be good, but that is not what this game provides. Yet there is a part of this game which can make you feel like an elder vampire. This game is clearly designed for a controller over keyboard and mouse, as the fact that you use the Enter key to choose dialogue responses might give away. But as long as you're okay with that, the basics of hand-to-hand combat feel and look good, and as you unlock more abilities, you'll soon find yourself tearing through entire groups with satisfying ease. The impressive animations, the exaggerated effects, and the way abilities can chain together to bring this methodical destruction to all who oppose you does communicate a substantial power gap, and there's plenty of vampiric flavour here to sink your teeth into. This action can be fun, but even here, this game feels successful as an action game more than as an RPG. Individually, combat abilities can be interesting, but there's little attempt to foster any kind of character building with them. On the surface, 24 different abilities provides a decent amount of choice, but that number's misleading as you can only use 4 abilities at a time, with 1 equipped from each row. The first row of abilities all focus on a core damage dealing skill that are heavily shaped by each clan's identity, and these can be quite varied. But the second row are all mobility skills, 3 of which are based on just moving forward, plus 1 that's instead moving backwards to a marked location, 1 that slows time, and Ventru's Possession, which is admittedly more unique and allows you to briefly control an enemy. The third row, however, are even less varied, with all just being a single target crowd control. 1 dazes an enemy, 1 dazes them with damage over time, 1 mutes an enemy, 1 makes an enemy run away, 1 makes an enemy walk forward, and the last one has them walk forward and attack you while taking more damage. The fourth row are then the ultimate abilities that cost considerably more blood to use, but do again bring back some real variation and clan identity. To see the problem with this, let's look at 2 examples, like, say, Tremere and La Sombra. The Tremere first row ability is Blood Curse, which makes an enemy explode the next time they take damage. This is an iconic skill that is delightfully animated and can be fun to play around with. But it's also pretty bad. The agonizingly slow cast time makes this hard to even use unless done preemptively outside of combat. Fights in this game are often long with multiple waves, so this core skill can go unused for long stretches, and even if you can pull it off, it gives no opportunity to feed. Feeding off staggered enemies is a huge part of combat. This recharges both the blood you need to use these abilities and your health, making it much like the glory kills in Doom that I assume inspired it. So Tremere Blood Curse has okay damage, but gives no feeding and needs to be cast before combat begins. Meanwhile, La Sombra's Arms of Ahriman costs the same and also does okay damage, but it's cast instantly, CCs anyone hit, and allows you to then feed on them even if they're not staggered to allow you to effortlessly recharge blood and health. Blood Curse is way cooler, but the difference in usefulness between these 2 skills in practice is astronomical. Then you have mobility skills. Tremere has a mark and recall ability that's interesting but very situational and needs preparation to set down a mark. La Sombra, on the other hand, has Shadow Step, which costs less blood to use and teleports you directly behind an enemy, allowing you to insta-kill and feed off them with no downside. This makes Shadow Step a similar but better version of several other second row abilities. And the third row abilities are similar. Tremere's CC does damage over time but doesn't allow you to feed. La Sombra's CC makes them run away, which also makes feeding a bit annoying, but if you instead swap to the Toreador ability Beckon, you get another single target CC, but this one lasts longer, makes them come to you for easy feeding, and even costs 1 less blood to use. This Tremere ability does have some rare synergy with the earlier Blood Curse, as you can try to combo them, but otherwise these abilities are just better or worse versions of the same thing. Meanwhile, with the 4th row abilities, it's La Sombra's turn to be terrible, as Enter Oblivion just lets you enter a shadow realm where ranged enemies can't attack you for a little bit. But you can swap that out for a more universal big AoE damage like Brujar's Earthquake, and you can't really go wrong. So these abilities feature a lot of overlap, they aren't balanced, they don't reward creativity, even if creativity and experimentation could still be fun, and once you find 4 that work, you can just use those for the rest of the game, which makes every fight play out very similarly. If Bloodlines 2 was viewed as an action game, repetition would probably be its biggest problem. In addition to the basic enemy type, you fight bigger elites who mostly just bring a bigger health bar, as well as an unbirthed type of enemy that do shake the gameplay up as you can't feed off them to recharge blood. This means you have to be far more selective in your ability use and rely more on basic attacks and telekinesis, which makes for a simple but clever twist that helps stop later combat from growing stale. The final new enemy type that's introduced is just guys with more guns. On hard difficulty, the sniper and assault rifle variants of these guys kill you easily, which can feel cheap as you might be dying to enemies that spawn in mid-fight and kill you from off-screen. As you still take damage while feeding, this can also put you in a position where not feeding causes your life to be slowly chipped down by difficult to avoid bullets, but standing still to heal and feed might cause you to be hit by even more bullets, making feeding around guns seem like a roll of the dice that either saves you or dooms you with no actual player input. This feels bad, which might be the reason why glory kills in Doom just make the player invulnerable. Dying to gunfire also rubs extra salt in the wound left by the player's inability to equip weapons or guns themselves. You can still use guns in this game, just via telekinesis, where you pick up dropped weapons, automatically fire off a few rounds, and then flippantly discard them. There's no logical reason why fire couldn't keep hold of one of these weapons, and seeing as they're the only thing in this game that can make quick work of even an Elder Vampire, you might think this provides a solid logical reason why they should. But that's not the type of game this is, so you're stuck with just a telekinesis skill that, while strong, is also annoyingly inconsistent to use mid-battle, as it's easy to accidentally pick up the wrong thing. If this game did have guns, limited ammunition could introduce an element of strategic planning. Resource management is often undervalued as a part of RPG design, as it can add needed variety and consequences to combat by altering the player's situation even when enemy encounters don't change that much. In Bloodlines 2, the only thing which comes close to resource management are 4 potions, found sporadically in story missions, which increase health, damage, defense, and blood. On hard, you can only carry 2 of each type, and these can be useful get out of jail free cards. On normal, I imagine players mostly ignore them, but when it comes to resource management, I guess this is still better than nothing. That said, it would be hard to describe combat or ability selection in this game as strategic. This is a game about dodging enemy attacks, spamming the same few abilities, feeding as much as possible, and sometimes trying to look good while doing all this because combat can look good, so why not have fun with that? Through this, you can feel like a powerful Elder Vampire, but it still rarely feels like an RPG. What's more, I can't help but wonder if the enjoyment combat provides wouldn't actually be enhanced if there was no obligation to be an RPG. You can currently unlock all abilities, but this is done via a tedious grind of a yet-to-be-discussed mini-game? As you can't even reload to test abilities, this creates a system that heavily disincentivizes experimentation, all while combat often suffers from a lack of variety. If players could just try out everything, variety would be improved, while maybe even adding in more strategy, because perhaps there are some interesting combinations and synergies that otherwise wouldn't become apparent. Instead, just like the linked outfits, abilities are locked behind a grind because that's what RPGs do, I guess, and it's not like there's anything else where progression comes from here. So what does this leave? Combat is overwhelmingly about action over strategy, Character building consists entirely of selecting 4 combat abilities, the story is linear, dialogue choices are an illusion, the reputation system impacts almost nothing, and clan choice only seems to be here out of obligation. Or maybe to sell DLC. So how exactly is this an RPG? There is a focus on a player character, even if it's not done well, and some customization of that character, but where are the statistical rules or systems that govern gameplay? And this isn't about a lack of damage numbers in combat, there's more to systems than this. Disco Elysium has no combat, but its skill checks still count as a form of gameplay. But here, there's not just no numbers, but no dice, no skill checks, and no skills. Just action combat, a linear story, and a dry, desiccated world. And even if you're not convinced, how much does that change? I've focused on Bloodlines 2 as not an RPG because it's a difficult thing to prove and will become relevant again later in this video, but even if you don't agree, it would still surely only change this game from being not an RPG to a bad one. So, what about that open world? I've been focusing on Bloodlines 2 as an RPG because that's the claim its marketing makes. But generally, it is better to judge games for what they are than what they're not. So, what is Bloodlines 2? One of the stranger comparisons this game has drawn is with Dishonored. Actually, playing this game made me confused where that comparison even came from, but it seems when the rebooted version of the game was re-announced, some comparisons were made, which the Chinese Room and Paradox encouraged. So let's start here. Dishonored is defined by its complex, non-linear level design that emphasizes player choice. Bloodlines 2 isn't. Its combat levels are entirely linear, with just one path through them, and very few combat encounters that can be avoided. It does at least have stealth, with 2 clans even having stealth-related passives. But stealth has 2 major problems. The first is that its simplicity makes it too easy. I'll show a few sped-up examples on screen, as I think video can speak louder than words here, but basically normal enemies often just struggle to see you in time, particularly with one of those 2 clan passives. The game does try to address this by adding elites, and they do counter stealth by being immune to stealth kills. You can still get some free damage in through stealth, but otherwise you have to kill them in combat. And you will have to kill them because of the second problem, which is that if you're so stealthy that you avoid enemies altogether, this game just doesn't let you proceed. Doors are locked and cannot be interacted with until you go back and kill all the enemies you missed. And I don't remember that part in Dishonored, a game famous for its non-lethal options. Still, that's not to say there's nothing of Dishonored here, because there is Blink. It even has the same name, and this isn't the only part that feels inspired from other games. You have glory kills from Doom, Witcher Vision from The Witcher 3, hyped up multi-health bar bosses that feel surprisingly Yakuza, the Wanted system from GTA, and the cleaning graffiti collectibles from whatever open world game was sad enough to think that would be fun gameplay. I'm sure there must be one, I just can't think of it. And I don't mean tagging your own graffiti, like in San Andreas or The Warriors, because you don't tag in Bloodlines 2. This is an elder vampire power fantasy, so you just do the cleanup. But really, this game feels a lot like an early 2010s or 2000s open world game. Not a modern open world game that has, for better or worse, refined exactly what it wants to be, but an open world game from a time before this, when developers weren't always sure what they were meant to be doing with their open worlds, but knew they wanted to include them anyway. Initially, there is nothing to do in the world of Bloodlines 2. The first 4 hours of the game's 20-ish runtime are spent doing linear story missions, where the world is only used to sometimes move through as you go from one objective marker to the next. After this, Fire becomes Sheriff, and the game opens up by introducing side quests, clan trainers who give access to other abilities, and sometimes even a minor choice in what order to complete main story quests. There are two things this world does well. The first is vibes. Bloodlines 2 often looks great, even if the frame rate might be lower than you'd expect based on your hardware, but environments both inside and out make great use of striking neon lighting. The snowy Christmas setting then brings a coziness that complements the neon nights to give Seattle a distinct feeling. The city looks particularly good from the rooftops, which brings us to the second thing. This game has good traversal. Most buildings can be easily climbed, although you still have to pay attention to pipes, ledges, and stairwells to do this, and once you leave the streets behind, you can glide between rooftops. As gliding gradually lowers elevation, this makes traveling this way require just a little bit of brain power to plan your route, but it's not so much that it feels cumbersome or tedious. It's a shame then, but there's little reason to engage with this traversal. On rare occasions, a story mission might give you a reason to climb up, but soon generic enemies, which remember give no loot or XP, can spawn on rooftops, so if you just want to get from A to B, you might as well run through the streets. It's quicker, safer, and easier. Going from A to B is a big part of the game, particularly if you do side quests. Bloodlines 2 has a total of 6 side quests, and if this were an RPG, it would surely be in contention for having the worst RPG side quests in gaming. 3 of these quests just ask the player to get all of a certain type of collectible. Clean 30 pieces of Anarch graffiti because one vampire finds them ugly. Collect 9 metal crosses for one vampire to use in their artwork, and destroy 30 surveillance cameras because they were set up by vampire hunters, which does make this one task a bit more understandable. There is a 4th collectible in the game, which is to remove marks of fire, but there's no quest attached, and otherwise this is identical to cleaning graffiti. Why anyone involved with this game thought removing graffiti was such a good activity that it needed to be included twice, I struggle to understand. The other 3 quests aren't much better. Each one is a simple, repeatable activity introduced with just one line of dialogue. They involve going from A to B to deliver a package, following the trail of a mortal and then killing them, or killing one group of normal enemies somewhere in the city. If it sounds like I'm being deliberately reductive, here is what one of these quests look like.
You have something for me to do?
Between Muldoon's Auto Repair and Chinatown, you'll find a back door to one of the finest kitchens in Seattle. Would you drop this little gift to Miss Yu? It is rather unstable, so do be fleet of foot.
Very well. Be well, Mrs. Thorne.
Step back!
Miss Yu, I have a package for you.
Oh, thank you.
You might wonder why you're delivering fast food in this game, but you have to remember that this is an elder vampire power fantasy of being an unpaid gig worker. This isn't a one-off either. The next Miss Thorne quest sends you dumpster diving, and the one after is collecting trash from a trash can. In fact, it almost feels like this is some sort of self-aware joke, as if the entire point is to make this elder vampire do the most pointless and degrading things possible.
You have something for me to do?
Ah, now. I believe there is something to pick up in the alley behind the Crab Walk. I'm afraid it's in a dumpster, but I'm sure you can liberate it. Forgive the smell.
Very well. You have a pleasant night.
At least, that's what I was hoping. That at some point, these characters would acknowledge the absurdity of this. that there might be some payoff eventually, that there had to be more, something, anything. But there isn't. After completing all, there is no reward, no acknowledgement, and you're not even deemed worthy of deserving an explanation for why you did any of this. Luckily, you don't have to do any of this side content, but unluckily, each of these repeatable style quests is only available during its specific chapter, so if you don't do them right away, you miss your chance. Actually, maybe that's also lucky, but I imagine the constant warning messages that pop up do pressure unsuspecting players to do more side content than they would otherwise. After all, there's no way of knowing how pointless they are until it's too late. Outside of these quests and collectibles, there is one final part to the open world, and unlike everything else, this actually is related to being a vampire. On my first playthrough, I had no idea why some NPCs were a special colour. You can also run up and talk to any NPC, but the conversations didn't feel like human interactions, giving just the same 3 weird options.
I don't have any cash. You have a human heart. How beautiful it is. I feel lighter.
This seemed strange, but it only became stranger when one NPC I walked past attacked me in the street for no reason. In case I forgot to mention it already, you are actually an elder vampire in this game, but I guess this guy didn't know that. Still, as you are such a powerful vampire, it means attacking NPCs is a masquerade breach, because they're sent flying, and so it seemed I was just meant to take the abuse. I mean, I guess getting assaulted by random hipsters in the street and not being allowed to fight back is a key part of the elder vampire power fantasy. And yet, I didn't know why. Why do they act like this? What do the colors mean? What could possibly be the developer's intent with these design choices? A couple of hours later, I had managed to work it out, and a couple of hours after that, a tutorial popped up to explain it, which some might say is 4 hours too late. This is Blood Resonance, the system used to unlock other clan abilities. And the reason the tutorial takes so long to appear is because it's only after Fire becomes Sheriff that the clan trainers used in this unlock. Blood Resonance is basically a simple minigame. Some NPCs have red, blue, or pink blood. This colour shows their mood of angry, scared, or aroused. Feeding on these NPCs gives a small amount of special blood points, but if you talk to them first and choose the correct dialogue option, their mood is heightened and feeding on them gives far more blood points. The dialogue choice is always the same, so you just use the same root option for every angry person, intimidate the scared, and flirt with the horny. After this, each NPC type starts acting a certain way: angry attack, scared run for their life, horny mindlessly follow, and you can use this behavior to hopefully lure them into an alleyway to feed without being seen. If other NPCs do see you feeding, the masquerade meter starts filling up. If it's only one NPC watching you, you can usually just ignore them and feed all the way, but if multiple NPCs are nearby, or the police, continuing to feed will increase the masquerade level to red. After this happens, the police are called, if not there already, and while police follow you, the masquerade level continues to increase. Once it goes past red, a magical hand appears to instantly kill you, forcing you to reload while also permanently removing your saved blood points. I say magical because the most obvious explanation is that this hand belongs to the sheriff, as enforcing the masquerade is their job, except the sheriff is Fire, so presumably the decision to only show a hand was made to avoid drawing attention to this. Permanently losing blood points is a surprisingly harsh punishment. It's like losing souls in Dark Souls, but with no option to go pick them back up. Still, avoiding this is usually easy. Even if you feed in a bad place and get to red, the meter goes down as soon as the police can't see you, and you can quickly escape the police by running up any nearby building. Then you only need to wait a few seconds for the meter to drop from red to yellow, and the police instantly lose all interest, allowing you to continue as normal. The green and yellow level have no negative effects, they're just there to warn you before it goes red. And in red, you still have plenty of time. So as long as a building is nearby, you should be fine, and in the middle of a city, buildings aren't exactly rare. This makes it a very all-or-nothing system, where you can break the Masquerade constantly by feeding in public without needing to worry too much, but on the rare occasion something does go wrong, it can be quite frustrating. For example, in one story mission about doing boring sheriff stuff, you have to prevent a Masquerade breach caused by a group of thin blood vampires fighting a group of cops. And when you arrive, surely a Masquerade breach has already happened because vampires are using vampire abilities to kill cops. Here, you can just hang back until the cops die and then kill the vampires, but if you instead attack the vampires, this counts as a Masquerade breach, and the vampires and cops stop fighting each other to both only attack you. Also, this happens in the park, which is the only place without nearby buildings, and you have a time limit to kill the vampires in because vampires using their abilities in public for 7 minutes is fine, but if a vampire uses their ability in public for 7 minutes and 1 second, that clearly violates the Masquerade. So anyway, this is how the sheriff killed me for breaking the Masquerade while I was busy enforcing the Masquerade, which I had to do because I am the sheriff. The sheriff, i.e. me, killed the sheriff, also me, because enforcing the Masquerade is breaking the Masquerade. Now that is some catch-22 bullshit. And why don't the real Masquerade breakers get magically one-shot? Fuck it, why not one-shot the one-shotter too? Magic hands are also a Masquerade breach, and I want my fucking blood points back. Usually though this is easy to avoid, and blood points are easy to get. If you want to unlock many new abilities, this becomes a long, repetitive grind of running around the city until you see the right color person, and then doing the same thing over and over. But if you only want to swap out 1 or 2 weaker abilities for better ones, it's not that bad, I guess. Overall, Blood Resonance and the Masquerade meter are poorly designed, but they're also the only thing in this game that could count as emergent gameplay. And they're the only side content actually connected to being a vampire, the only thing that makes this static world feel slightly alive, the only thing that provides progression after unlocking your first 4 abilities, and the only reason to explore, if running around with your Witcher vision looking for red or blue people counts as exploration. The way Blood Resonance was implemented is a mess, but somehow this game would be far worse without it, because otherwise there is nothing about this open world that justifies its existence. The world would just be this big, empty place that's only here to slow the story down by forcing you to run along the same streets to the same places again and again. Which is exactly what happens in Fabian's sections. For about 2/3 of Bloodlines 2, you play as Fire. The remaining third occurs when you go to sleep and switch to Fabian, as he regains his recent memories, or sometimes memories from 100 years earlier. These dreams focus on the unsolved case of the Rebar Killer, which makes for a slightly cheesy, noir-inspired murder mystery. As a Malkavian, Fabian has access to several creative detective abilities, including interrogating inanimate objects for clues, but there isn't any real gameplay involved with this. You have access to several abilities, but you can only use the one the game tells you to use, and only when the game allows it. Sometimes in dialogue there can be correct and incorrect choices, but choosing wrong just forces you to try again straight away until you get it right, and you also search environments for clues, which your cursor helps you find by changing shape. But this is the extent of Fabian's gameplay. Mostly, these sections feel like a visual novel, where you're just there for the story, yet the open world still exists. You can't fight as Fabian, you can't even jump, and there is a fast forward button to move quicker, but you still spend a long time doing nothing but moving between the same locations, and my god do you go to these same locations a lot of times. The fast forward button is a mercy, and yet the further into the game you get, the more egregious the repetition becomes. One time, near the end, you speak to an NPC who wants you to get them an otherwise unimportant book before they'll help you, So you walk from one side of the map to the other, pick up the book, hear one observational line of dialogue from Fabian, and then walk all the way back for the conversation to just continue. This is not the only example of this, and these moments come across as such obvious padding for a game that is clearly insecure about its below-average runtime. Now, everyone knows it's not your length that matters, it's how you use it. But when you spend so long just running back and forth, clearly you're not using it very well. And when this happens on top of the short length, it does start to feel a little pathetic. On subsequent playthroughs, this is even worse, but at least the Chinese Room are aware of this problem and have said they're planning to implement an option to skip Fabian's sections in a future update. For now though, the open world just works against these parts. It's a shame because I like this Seattle. It has the looks, the atmosphere, and the potential for interesting content. But Bloodlines 2 does so little with this space. Is it really too much to expect side quests to be unique and contain stories? Or for money to drop from enemies to be used in shops to buy outfits and potions? Or some gameplay reason to use rooftop travel? Or Fabian sections that respect the player's time? Bloodlines 2 doesn't feel like a game which wants to be an RPG, but it also doesn't feel like it really wants to be an open world game. So what does that leave? Well, if you look at the other games the Chinese Room have made, you might find an answer. If you ignore what this game is not, and give it a pass for what it does badly, is there at least a good game underneath? The Chinese Room are known for making walking sims. This term was often meant derogatively, but it is the term which stuck, and it can still describe their last game before this. Yet, Still Wakes the Deep is also much more than this. Since the early days of the almost entirely passive Dear Esper, the Chinese Room have clearly evolved, and Still Wakes the Deep hides its linearity with much more complex environmental design, while tempering its passivity with constant interactivity to create something truly immersive. It is still light on gameplay, but it does have gameplay, and it's gameplay that complements the story it wants to tell. And ultimately, its tale of horror-infused disaster hitting a remote oil rig is worth experiencing. Still Wakes the Deep is not really my kind of game, but it does such a good job executing what it wants to be that I still walked away mostly impressed. In some ways then, Still Wakes the Deep feels like the exact opposite of the clumsily executed identity crisis that is Bloodlines 2. And yet, if you look closer, you can see similarities. Bloodlines 2 also brings one important thing past Chinese Room games lacked in action combat. And when this is combined with strong environmental design, it can create a compelling linear experience. What's more, Bloodlines 2 does have a good story, it's just not Fire's story. If you play this game to roleplay as a powerful vampire, you will be disappointed. But if you accept that Fire is just a character, then there is an interesting mystery here to unravel. And maybe I'm just a fan of elaborate mysteries that the player gets to try and work out for themselves along the way, because despite all the many problems I have with this game, I still found this one core aspect to be an enjoyable driving force that kept me wanting to know what would happen next. So let's examine the story, because there's no better way to show what this game is and isn't. Expect full spoilers in this section, including the ending. If you want to avoid spoilers, skip ahead to the next chapter. At the beginning of the game, Fire wakes up and diablerizes Fabian. From this point on, Fire's main motivation is removing the mark on their hand that is limiting their power. They then find a city in chaos after its ruling prince, Campbell, was assassinated, and soon meet its other important players. Past Prince Lou Graham, who still demands respect but is a diminished figure haunted by strange visions. New Prince Ryong, who's doing their best to act in control despite not really being so. Stoic Anarch leader Katsumi, and Ryong's two chief assistants, the shy, nerdy Tremere researcher, Sophia, and the annoyingly sassy Nosferatu spy master, Tolly. One thing that's hard to ignore through this is Fire's complete lack of curiosity. For starters, they wake up after 100 years in the future, and while there are occasional comments to explain pieces of technology or catch them up on something they missed, at no point does Fire actually seem interested in any part of the modern world. I remember once returning to the town centre I grew up in, after being away for 6 or 7 years, and being amazed how much it had changed. New buildings, different shops, closed restaurants, everything seemed slightly smaller. It was strangely disorienting. I cannot imagine waking up after 100 years and just having nothing to say. This lack of curiosity is extended to Fabian, who tells you he doesn't know what he was up to or how he discovered Fire, and Fire just accepts this. Then you meet lots of people who might have known Fabian and might therefore have insight into what he was doing, which could well be the key to understanding the mark, and Fire just never mentions him. This is such an obvious place to start this investigation that this stands out, and you'd think Fabian might be curious too, assuming he's telling the truth about not being able to remember. Anyway, get used to Fire never asking useful questions and not knowing who to suspect. After these introductions, Fire goes to sleep, leading to the first Fabian section, and it's here, as the gameplay disappears, that the story starts to get interesting. In these dreams, Fabian is a detective working for the Seattle PD, a position that helps him enforce the Masquerade by taking over and thus covering up suspicious cases. Here, Fabian is investigating the Rebar Killer, a series of murders where the victims are decapitated and impaled by rebar. But as he inspects the corpse of the first victim, he gets a flashback of a near identical corpse 100 years earlier. Through investigating this victim, Fabian is able to deduce that the killer is very strong enough to rip someone's head off, that the victims have some connection to vampire society, and that the killing occurred at daytime, meaning the perpetrator can't be a vampire. It's in these moments that there could have been real gameplay. As it is, the game guides you to the clues, and then Fabian makes all the deductions. Whereas in a good detective game, the player should be the one to do the deducing. Regardless, despite everything Fabian learns, none of it helps with the mark, and as Malkavians are meant to have questionable sanity, Fabian is automatically an unreliable narrator, leaving the player even less sure what's going on. Fire then gets tasked with taking down Sheriff Benny, leading to the first boss fight, which is actually really good, even if there's a complete missed opportunity for Benny to rip his shirt off to reveal a sick back tattoo after he angrily breaks free of the concrete he's entombed in. In this fight, you can still use your abilities, but you can't continuously recharge blood through feeding, meaning you're forced to engage with dodging and charge attacks. But after a while, ads start spawning in that are hostile to both you and Benny. You can use this as an opportunity to disengage to let each side fight it out, but staying in the action means getting a chance to feed, which creates this rare moment where combat presents a choice of approach. Benny seems to recognize Fire's mark, but he's lost most of his humanity and cares only for killing the weak, meaning you don't get anything useful out of him. After this, Fire chooses who to give Benny to, and gets punished and/or rewarded by being made sheriff, which slows the story down with less important tasks that flesh out the other central characters, including doing chores for Lou, work for Tully and Katsumi, and helping Sophia to research the mark. Fabian continues to dream, which involves investigating more rebar victims, where we get a glimpse into Seattle of the 1920s, back when Lou was in charge, and learn that in 1925, the killings were by a vampire hunter named Santiago, a human who should be long dead by today. In the present, we learn that another important vampire, the art-obsessed Toreador Isabella, also seems to have went rogue, as her latest piece involves draining the blood of hundreds of mortals, which some might say is not subtle enough for the Masquerade. It's here that Bloodline 2 dials the spectacle up to 11, and this won't be the last time. Once you leave the open world, environmental design is regularly a strong point. Linear sections often don't feel that linear, providing an illusion of larger spaces with complex pathing, yet you're still subtly guided where to go, and all without anything as out of place as yellow paint. What's more, environments can show an impressively exaggerated sense of style. At times, realism seems almost discarded as the game just embraces full maximalism, which combines with the macabre subject matter to create some genuinely nightmarish scenes. Like in Isabella's nightclub, where we fight hordes of brainwashed and barely alive, blood-drained humans. In fact, you fight so many that the gameplay gets a little old, but this does lead into the second boss fight. It's here we get that rare moment of dialogue choices mattering, as repeatedly flattering Isabella's art allows you to fight with your abilities. Otherwise, Isabella uses the power of the mark to weaken you, locking your abilities and forcing you to get good at dodging, although telekinesis certainly helps. Before dying, Isabella reveals that she's a member of the Sabbat, an extreme, if rather diminished sect of vampires that hate mortals and oppose the Camarilla. When Fire reports this, no one believes them and Tolly suspiciously shuts you down, but the next vampire you investigate also has Sabbat connections. This time there's no boss fight, with the vampire instead wearing explosives that are remotely detonated, and that's a great shame because the boss fights are some of this game's best moments, yet there will not be another one until the very end. After this, Sophia agrees to help you look into the connection between the Sabbat and the Mark, and Fire comes across a more inhuman form of Sabbat vampire underground called the Unbirthed, which in turn seem to have brought the attention of professional vampire hunters, both of which provide sorely needed new enemy types for you to fight. Throughout all this, you're periodically interrupted by Fabian's dreams, where the lack of gameplay and repetition become a growing problem. These dreams continue to focus on rebar killings, with Fabian often finding strange connections to himself, as well as constant connections between the modern-day cases and those in 1925. This includes meeting a Malkavian vampire named Misty, who is pregnant. When you flash back to the 1920s, Misty is still pregnant, but not a vampire. It turns out Fabian was the one who embraced her in order to save her life, which in turn condemned her unborn baby into an eternity of unlife. This is not important to the main story, but it is one of the most thought-provoking and horrifying ideas this game explores. It asks questions about a side of the law most people would probably never think about, and affirms the central idea of vampirism as actually more curse than power fantasy. Things I wish Bloodlines 2 had more of. As Fabian's sections continue, we eventually see a conversation between him, Sophia, and his sire Gideon in the 1920s about the rebar killings, which have now been concluded to be the hunter Santiago. Yet Gideon seems to realize something during this and leaves to go see Prince Lou, after which he was never heard from again. Back in the present, Fire just so happens to find Gideon, deep underground, but he's not the man he once was. Imprisoned for a century, Gideon's mind has long been broken. His loyalty is now with the Sabbat, and it seems he is the one responsible for the strange visions other characters have been having, including Fire, who has heard his voice several times before this. An insane Gideon begs Fire to diablerize him, but they refuse, killing him instead in the hopes that this will finally remove the mark. It doesn't, but with the vision stopped, Lou is no longer haunted, and so finally steps down from her ivory tower to retake control, which is an easy task considering she is Ryong's sire and can dominate her. This also makes Lou your main suspect, seeing as she must have been the one to imprison Gideon, and through this, Fabian is finally able to crack the case. Everyone who died in 1925 benefited Lou in some way, But the killings weren't done by a vampire, meaning it must have been Lu's ghoul, Campbell, a man who was later embraced, became prince after Lu, and was mysteriously assassinated just before the start of the game. The story of Santiago was a cover-up manufactured by Lu, and Gideon was imprisoned after figuring this all out. And so, the mystery of the Rebar Killer is solved. In 1925, at least. None of this explains the killings in the present, and it turns out that this is not the first time Fabian's cracked the case. Far from it. But every time he's figured it out, Campbell or Lu have used Dominate to wipe his mind. From here, the story heads into its final act. Fire is sent to kill the head of the vampire hunters in the city, although some of the court think this is a bad idea. The player might also think it's a bad idea, and may in particular not want to keep working for Lu, given what you now know. But as usual, you don't get a choice in the matter, until finally you do. After fighting your way through the hunter base, you meet their leader, Agent Baker, who it turns out is dying of cancer and begs you to embrace her. This is one of the 3 choices that determine the game's ending, but unlike the other 2, this one actually has an impact in-game. If you turn Baker, you will meet her again in a later story mission, where you can tell her what to order the remaining vampire hunters to do. This is the second choice that impacts the ending. The third is a conversation with Fabian in your head, where Fabian asks Fire what they plan to do after removing the mark: stay in Seattle, leave, or stay and try to become prince. We'll get to the impact of these soon. But if you instead kill Baker here, the mission where you later meet her is replaced with a mission to kill these 3 generic enemy hunter groups on rooftops in the city. There's no real story to this replacement mission, just some hunters are still in the city, so go kill them, stupid elder vampire lackey. After dealing with the hunters, Sophia sends a message saying she's finally deciphered the mark, and to come meet her under the park. At this point, Sophia seems highly suspicious, as she clearly has a crush on Fire, and even starts calling them my love. And while she's hardly the only suspicious character left, it's a good rule to not trust any woman you don't know that well that starts calling you my love. As you descend under the park to find an elaborate Sabbat research facility, including notes indicating Fire was experimented on here, it seems even more likely to be a trap. And yet, instead, you find Sophia's corpse. Which made me quite sad, because I thought I was going to find a sick boss fight down here. After this, Lu continues ordering Fire to kill her enemies, which this time is Katsumi and the Anarchs. You still can't openly disobey, despite this being an insane command, but when you finally track Katsumi down, you are at least given a choice. Right? I mean, it sure looks like a choice. There's even a little skull icon, and there's no way the developers would make a little skull icon if you couldn't do something. Right?
Goodbye, Katsumi.
We can take Lou Graham. Together. The Anarchs. You, me, Max. There is no choice.
Well, at least Fire's honest about it. Of all the fake choices in this game, this is the one that's going to stay with me. After this, everything always plays out the same. You still fight the same Anarchs, whether you try to join them or genocide them, and you still talk to Damsel in a conversation where nothing you say matters. But at least when you go to report this, you finally find out who's responsible for the mark.
Hello, my love.
Fire!
It's a shame Sophia's earlier "my loves" are such a big red flag, as if the writers just stuck to nervous flirting, this twist would hit harder. Yet there are many red herrings in this story. Campbell dies off-screen, Fabian sometimes seems to hide things in his flashback like his real name, Lu being responsible for Gideon could make her responsible for the mark, and Tolly always knows more than he lets on, so Sophia's "my love" can just feel like one more deliberate red herring, there to make you suspect her so that her sudden death hits harder and makes you feel guilty. But Sophia does make sense. She is a Tremere researcher who is more likely to have knowledge on how to create an ancient Sabbath symbol than anyone else, and she does have motive. After this, Ryong gets a nice tan, and before the same can happen to Fire, Fabian asks you to trust him. And why not? He is suddenly less suspicious than ever. Also, in case you have not been paying attention, you don't actually have a choice. This moment would hit harder if there was actually anything smart about Fabian's plan, because jumping out the window into a very deadly sun feels less like some stroke of genius and more like poor planning by Sophia combined with slightly contrived writing. Fire then slow crawls into the sewer and passes out, leading to Fabian's final flashback. It's here where you're sent across the map to fetch a pointless book, and overall this section really tanks the story's momentum, which is a shame because it has a great ending. After years of working for Lou and Campbell and always getting drawn back to solving the rebar killings of the 1920s, only to have his mind repeatedly wiped when he gets too close, Fabian has finally realized this is what's happening. So this time, before he gets made to forget, he tries to record Campbell admitting his crime. And he fails, in the same way he always does. It's easy to wonder why Campbell and Lou never just killed Fabian, as why risk him one day succeeding. But I think the reason is they never saw Fabian as a threat. Every time he's cracked the case, he's handled it in the worst way, by telling Lou or Campbell, and the more times he keeps doing this, the safer they probably felt. And even if he didn't, no one takes Fabian seriously anyway. As we repeatedly see, he's just the wacky Malkavian that everyone's grown used to walking all over. Just like Campbell does next, when he forgets the importance of "don't open it," and orders Fabian to investigate a mysterious box he recently intercepted. A box containing Fire, who Fabian then wakes using his blood to break the cycle, killing himself in the hopes he'll take Campbell with him. And so the big twist with Fabian is that there is no twist. He spends the entire game trying to help Fire because he's a naturally kind and helpful person. His memories contain no deliberate lies, and he's not even an unreliable narrator. Maybe. The reason his memories seem confusing is because they were erased, and the order we see them is the order they come back to him. This still leaves the mystery of the modern-day Rebar Killer's identity, which is a mystery the game tries to leave open. Maybe it was Fabian doing the murders to try to subconsciously break the cycle. Maybe they were just something he imagined, real events his perception distorted, or maybe they were part of Sophia's plan, a way to torment the guilty in Seattle before her big reveal. This isn't the only thing the game fails to address. The story does have a few unexplained contrivances. Why would Lou keep Gideon alive in the first place? How did Sophia let the box containing Fire just get intercepted? And Fire entered Torpor 100 years ago, and Fabian's flashbacks are 100 years ago, which suggests some connection, but this ends up just a coincidence. Mysteries naturally invite the audience to ask lots of questions, but when it comes time for the big reveal, the best mysteries are able to answer them. Bloodlines 2 doesn't do this, but it's still an enjoyable ride, and I think the mystery aspect is successful. Speaking of which, Sophia is in many ways Fabian's polar opposite. She is cruel, manipulative, largely successful in her schemes, and tries to enslave Fire rather than set them free. Sophia does have one similarity to Fabian though, which is that she too couldn't let go of Gideon. Gideon was Fabian's sire, but he was also Sophia's lover, and while Sophia didn't know why Gideon was killed, she could tell who was responsible. So she waited and researched and plotted her revenge, while growing ever more distant from her remaining humanity. Her plan took shape when she found an elder vampire in Torpor. She then used the Sabbat mark to bind and weaken them, and meant to wake them in front of what remained of Gideon, so they would diablerize him, hoping this would restore her love. Diablerie can sometimes cause the one consumed to take over, if the one consumed is strong enough, and Gideon was powerful, so with the mark, maybe this could have worked. But instead, the one consumed ended up being Fabian. Fabian is not powerful, or maybe he didn't even try to take over, and with the truth finally revealed, he finds his essence is spent. You never see Fabian's face, and in this final conversation, you make his dialogue choices as well as Fire's, which makes it almost feel like he's the true main character of this story. Yet, you have to finish this tale without him. Fire wakes up to a Seattle in ruin. Sophia has used a large stockpile of blood to wake an army of unbirthed, although you only see the aftermath. Fire then ascends the tower where the Camarilla of Seattle once ruled from, as blood cascades down the windows in waterfalls, to confront Sophia one last time. This is the third, final, and best boss fight, although there's little to make the gameplay remarkable. Sophia tries to keep her distance, but otherwise it's just a culmination of everything before it, amidst an ultra-stylized backdrop. Still, it makes for a satisfying conclusion.
I will never leave you. For you, dear Fire, are mine. Mine! My love!
And then Bloodlines 2 ruins this strong climax by completely fumbling its ending. There are 6 endings you can get, all shown by a short, bland slideshow. If you killed Agent Baker earlier, vampire hunters burn Seattle to the ground and kill all the vampires they can, while Fire's fate is left unknown. This is considered the game's one bad ending, and it overwrites all other outcomes, which seems strange when killing Agent Baker is such a logical choice. Much like breaking the Masquerade, embracing a human without permission is considered a serious crime, and all other characters in this story should be strongly against this. But even ignoring this, you don't know Baker. You never interact with her before this, and embracing her forever bonds her to you, while making you responsible for her actions. The only thing you do know about Baker is she despises vampires and has devoted her life to killing them. So why would you want to bond to someone like this? Embracing her seems like a huge risk that offers little reward, and even killing her isn't that immoral compared to other things you do in this game, because she tries to kill you first and she'll die soon anyway. So why does this one quite sensible choice lead to the ultimate bad ending that overwrites everything else? This bad ending was the first one I received, which I didn't mind. My biggest criticism was that you never got to kill Lou. So on my second playthrough, I made sure to make as many different choices as possible, while also being as hostile to Lou as possible, because I now knew what a terrible person she is. The second ending I received was the Lou wins ending, which was strange. Ending guides and other information online say that as long as you save Baker, which ending you receive is meant to be determined by your reputation. So you should get the Lou ending by having positive rep with her, whereas I drove her reputation into the ground. You have a lot of interactions with Lou, which means a lot of opportunities to anger her and do the exact opposite of what these guides say is meant to lead to this ending. Yet clearly this didn't matter, which makes me convinced that whatever reputation does in determining these endings, it doesn't do it correctly. Most people get the Katsumi/Anarch ending. I know this because if you check Steam achievements, the percentage of people who have the one for this is far higher than all 5 other endings combined. But why is this overwhelmingly the most common, with people reporting they got this despite never doing anything to side with Katsumi or the Anarchs? The reason seems to be that this is the ending the game defaults to, as long as you embrace Baker. You don't interact with Katsumi that much, so I guess unless you actually try to kill her that one time, you're unlikely to lower your reputation enough to escape this ending. But this still leaves 3 more endings. Fire taking over as Prince, Tolly taking over as Prince, and a possibly bugged ending that's meant to involve Fire making one of the romanceable vampires Prince if you did all their side quests and exhausted all dialogue. But so far, people have only been able to get this to actually work with Mrs. Thorne. Regardless, all 3 of these have the same single necessary requirement. Embrace Baker, and then when Baker asks what she should do with the vampire hunters, order them to kill the Anarchs. After this, Fire will become Prince if you told Fabian that's what you want to do, and Tolly will become Prince if Fire instead said they want to leave Seattle. But why would anyone choose this? You're given 4 options. Ordering the vampire hunters to leave the city makes complete sense, as it's a way to avoid more death and destruction. Ordering them to kill Lou also makes sense, as Lou is evil, so if you need to kill someone, it may as well be her. Killing Ryong doesn't make much sense, as Ryong is just Lou's puppet at this point, but this still probably makes more sense than wiping out the Anarchs. Katsumi gives you so little reason to like or dislike her, she's largely uninvolved, so unless you just hate the Anarchs for reasons outside this game, why would anyone choose this option? And yet, 3 of the game's 6 endings require this specific choice, and it's a choice you only get if you made another not-so-obvious earlier choice. These are surely the 3 most desirable endings, and I can't understand why they would be implemented in such an arbitrary way. I can only assume that it was a priority to include lots of endings, because that's something RPGs do, and the initial plan was to cleverly use the reputation system to determine them based on a wide range of actions, so that even in this linear game, choices could still seem like they mattered. In the end, however, the reputation system didn't function correctly, causing everyone to end up with the Anarch ending, unless they did this one specific thing to block that by making the hunters genocide the Anarchs. Yet, it's not actually these endings which make this conclusion feel so bad, it's the complete lack of a confrontation with Lou. Sophia might be the mastermind, but Lou is the most evil and hateable person in this story, and everything that happens is her fault. She is the main antagonist. What's more, you spend the entire game doing chores for her, while being treated like garbage. And now, finally, you've removed the mark and regained all your power, making this the perfect moment for one last showdown. For Fabian's sake, if not for anything else. And it didn't even have to be a real showdown. I get that boss fights are difficult to implement, but just one final conversation where you have a choice. Rule together, leave and ignore her, blackmail her into being forever indebted to you, or kill her. Or don't even make it a choice, because we all know one of these options would be far more popular than the others. Just let a now fully powered Fire casually end her, like swatting a fly, to show the true power difference and give this story the closure it desperately needs. This is how the story is meant to end. Lou is what ties everything together. She is the malignant tumor at the heart of this city, and this game is begging for her to be excised so her cancer can spread no more. But instead, we just get multiple endings, because that's what RPGs do. Multiple, poorly handled endings, because that's what Bloodlines 2 does. I like this story. The mystery is fun, but its worst parts are still its RPG parts, and they drag the rest of it down. If you removed some of the filler and changed just a few of the worst design choices, this could be a good narrative-heavy action game. It wouldn't get away with charging full price, or with calling itself Bloodlines 2, but for what it's worth, there is a good game here, buried underneath it all, struggling for air. So far, I've avoided making comparisons to Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines because Bloodlines 2 disappoints even when you ignore its name. But no one should have to ignore this. There seems to be a popular idea that this name was just some mistake.
Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 does not feel or play like an RPG, which is what Bloodlines 1 was. I'm getting this out of the way early because right there what I just told you is one of the larger marketing blunders we have seen in gaming in a long time.
Ko's larger point is correct, but that last bit isn't. The role of marketing is to sell things. This game was marketed as a sequel and as an RPG to increase sales. And this worked. This name is the main reason it received so much attention. So that's not a blunder, it's business. And if Paradox want to sell this game with this name while making these claims, then they are the ones inviting these comparisons. So let's finally talk about Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Ironically, one of the best ways to defend Bloodlines 2 would be by making comparisons to the original. Bloodlines had problems, and I don't just mean its once extensive bugs. Melee combat is simplistic and can look awkward. Ranged combat does that annoying RPG thing of tying accuracy and reticule size to skill level, meaning even ranged focused players spend most of the game missing shots for no reason. Vampiric abilities are not balanced and all share the same blood pool, meaning you may as well just spam the best one only. Blood buff is OP, or at least the lockpick increase is. The skill system also isn't that well balanced and makes being a master of all trades a bit too easy. There are not enough things to spend money on, and no customizable appearance in character creation. Later story missions are often too linear and too action heavy, some boss fights suck, cutscenes could often look better, and the Hollywood sewers exist. Bloodlines had problems, but there are 3 things that made it work. The first is atmosphere. This game just knows how to capture that night feeling, and it knows how to create the experience of being an outsider, and it knows how to tap into early 2000s subcultures, and it knows that the fantasy of being a vampire lies in the middle of each of these. There is a mood to the music, a griminess to the art design, an eccentricity to its characters, and dark little secrets hiding behind every inch of its world, and all of this works perfectly with the premise of being a vampire turned against their will and now at the bottom of a society they don't even understand. The specific feeling this game evokes is sublime, and nothing else has ever been able to match this. The second thing is the writing.
I'm the finger down your spine when all the lights are out. I'm the name on all the men's room walls. When I pout, the whole world tries to make me smile. And everyone always wants to know who is that girl.
If a game expects you to spend up to 50% of its runtime sitting in dialogue, it goes a long way when that dialogue is fun. Bloodlines has some great lines. Interactions burst with personality, and even minor characters stay memorable. But it's more than this. Everything in this game is so exaggerated and dark, yet it still manages to feel authentic and believable due to a relentless consistency. Everything is exaggerated, but in the same way. So, a female vampire that wants to flaunt their sex appeal will flaunt it right in your face. Random screenwriters will whine about their misunderstood genius, and rebels without a cause become smugly self-righteous. Even the story's dedicated badass hero Nines just becomes a parody of someone trying to act cool.
Here's what I gotta tell you. And so you know, I don't lecture, I don't rap, I'm no bureaucrat.
This is where a lot of the fun comes from. But through this exaggeration, Bloodlines also manages to reflect some of the darkness of our own world, providing this constant satirical commentary that never needs to be said out loud. The third thing is a sense of ownership. Choice and consequence isn't a science. It's not about numbers or scale. Bloodlines' immersive sim approach to quest design makes you feel grateful every time you manage to sneak past someone with stealth, or talk your way out of trouble. Multiple solutions and paths means you often don't need specific skills to succeed, but there's still a satisfaction anytime lockpicking or hacking let you see a little more of this world and its secrets. Combat is often bad, but it still makes you appreciate what tools your particular character has. And the impact of clan is sometimes exaggerated by people. Not all are treated equally, but your clan is still regularly mentioned, and there are real downsides as well as perks. Nosferatu need to avoid being seen by normal NPCs, as their appearance is a masquerade breach. Is this well implemented? No. Does it make your character and playthrough feel like a reflection of your specific choices? Absolutely. Bloodlines has plenty of flaws, but these are so much more forgivable in an RPG. Poor balance, inconsistency, and jank are sometimes the price you pay for ambitious, reactive game design, and for many, the trade is worth it. And if you want proof, just look at this game's legacy. It was rushed out, released broken, and received limited sales, which should have ensured limited reach. And yet it still became one of the most enduring cult classics in gaming. It can be hard to see any part of Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines in this sequel. The change in writing style is forgivable. Bloodlines was its own thing, and few could replicate that. But this game just doesn't try to be a good RPG, and I don't think it even understands being a vampire. Power fantasies can be found everywhere, but Vampire the Masquerade was a game of personal horror. The main thing players fight are their own demons. Characters hunger for blood, wrestle with their conscience and humanity, resist the beast, and deal with clan-specific banes and compulsions. These things are determined by dice rolls, meaning success is never assured and that you can never feel safe. Bloodlines 2 doesn't include any of this. There's no hunger, no humanity, no frenzy, no compulsions, no banes, just a magic mark limiting your power and a bunch of assholes. A change in writing is understandable, but this game doesn't seem to get how vampirism is meant to be a curse. It's a monkey's paw. You get power and eternal life, but you're forever condemned to the night and driven from humanity, literally and metaphorically. In Bloodlines 1, there's an early side quest where you find a woman bleeding out in a hospital waiting room. As long as any character has told you about the healing properties of vampire blood before this, you get a choice to intervene and save her. This increases your humanity, although if you tell Heather you're a vampire, she screams, leading to a masquerade violation. As a newly turned vampire, both the player and their character probably don't understand what you've just done, but the game will show you. A few days later, Heather will track you down to thank you, but she's not just grateful, she's completely infatuated with you. This is because she's now a ghoul, a mortal who drank vampire blood and gained some of their power, but becomes bonded to them as a result, as Heather now is to you. You can then take advantage of this, or try to talk some sense into her, or angrily send her away, or invite her to live with you, maybe out of a sense of responsibility for making her this way, or maybe because a ghoul sounds useful, which she certainly tries to be. She can get you money, or give you blood, and at one point she even abducts some random guy off the street and locks him in your bathroom for you to eat later. How you choose to deal with both the guy and Heather is up to you, and her story doesn't end here, although I won't spoil it completely. You can also tell her to change her appearance. This appeals to the player's fantasy of having this hot girl that will do anything you ask, but dressing her up like some doll also emphasizes her complete loss of identity, something you stole from her, even if you didn't mean to. This is just one easily missable side quest, yet it has more choices and more consequences than the entirety of Bloodlines 2. and they are good choices and consequences. This quest shows how easily doing good can go wrong, how little your character understands about this unlife they've been forced into, and that vampirism is a curse, that the monkey's paw will always curl. Heather's life is saved, but she loses herself as a result. And you get your very own useful ghoul. But if this quest never made you stop and feel guilty, then this came at the cost of your humanity. What in Bloodlines 2 could you even compare this to? Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines 2 does not share a single piece of DNA with the game that was meant to have inspired it. But there was a game which did. The original version of Bloodlines 2 may have had problems, but there's no question what it was. The answer is proudly displayed across every developer interview. It's there in the footage that was shown, and it's there in the leaked footage which wasn't. This was an RPG. It was created alongside the 5th edition of the tabletop game and shared many of its systems. In fact, one system, Resonance, was actually created for this game and then imported into the tabletop. But there's more than just this, like attributes, skills, feats, disciplines, and humanity, which all show up on the character sheet. It also put heavy emphasis on non-linear quest design with multiple pathways and solutions, and its story focused on player choice and featured 5 different factions the player could align with. It may not have worked out, but it was pitched as a faithful sequel, and it seemed to remain as such up until its death. But of course, it did have problems. That much is clear, and beyond this, we will never truly know. That doesn't stop people from speculating though, sometimes in wildly inaccurate ways, and seeing as I have now spent a truly unhealthy amount of time going over these interviews, spying on developers' LinkedIns, and scouring all evidence that remains, I think I've earned the right to do some speculation of my own. A lot of people seem to be under the impression that this original version of the game had been in development for many years and was still nowhere close to being finished. This isn't true. Let's establish a timeline. In October 2015, Paradox acquired White Wolf and the World of Darkness IP. Hardsuit Labs then pitched a sequel to Bloodlines at the DICE Summit in 2016, meaning pre-production started after this. It was 3 years later that the game was announced to the public, with a demo following shortly after that was playable at E3. At this point, a release date was meant to be just months away, but instead, 6 months later, it was delayed. Yet there were signs that the game was mostly finished. In an interview explaining this delay, Brian Mitsoda implied as much and said they were almost finished with recording and implementing dialogue. This is one of the final steps in game development, because after this, changes to content involving dialogue would require expensive re-recordings. Hardsuit Labs also described the game as systems complete at this time. In this same interview, Mitsoda highlighted combat, animations, and the hub zones as the areas which still needed improvement. This makes sense because these are the same things that looked bad and therefore received criticism in the E3 demo, although the official PR response was it was delayed for polish and bug fixes to avoid the same problems of the first game. 8 months later, however, it was delayed again, and the entire leadership was fired, removed, or quit. Paradox then brought in a former Ubisoft consultant who specialized in shipping games, clearly in hopes of salvaging whatever money they could from the project, but this didn't work, and 6 months later, it was cancelled. This part shouldn't be surprising. If the game was already in trouble and then you fire everyone important and lose a lot of staff, that trouble would probably grow. As for what that trouble was, that part we don't know, but based on how this played out, My guess is that as the game got closer to release, much of it was on track, but some areas were not good enough or had fallen badly behind schedule, and this problem wasn't realized in time to adequately fix. And so, as some areas start to finish up, as the voice recording implies, other areas needed to be entirely redone, which could jeopardize what was finished. Basically, if content's finished and systems change, content might break and need to be remade. Combine this with some serious disagreements over the solution, and it starts to be possible to see how a game nearly finished might never finish, and why Paradox would kill a game that just a year earlier they were happy to announce with a release date. But I do think there's one more piece to the puzzle that no one seems to consider. What if this has less to do with what happened at Hardsuit Labs and more to do with what happened at Paradox? Bloodlines 2 was pitched in 2016 at a time when Paradox were focusing on growing their publishing division, including with other RPGs. Later that year, Paradox IPO'd and became a publicly traded company that gives quarterly updates on financials and business strategy. 4 years later, Paradox's growth had slowed, their publishing division was doing poorly, and their best success was coming from their core strategy games that could be supported through regular DLC. So they changed direction to reflect this, cancelling many unannounced projects and scaling back publishing to focus on their proven niche. This is what they said they were doing at the time, and this is what the years since proved they did. There were 2 senior producers at Paradox associated with Hardsuit's Bloodlines 2, Christian Schluter and Florian Schwarzer. These 2 seemed to be with the project since early on, and spoke regularly about it after its reveal. When it was announced that Brian Mitsoda and Martin Clooney were fired, fans soon discovered that Schluter and Schwarzer seemed to be gone as well, and assumed they were fired at the same time. But a Reddit post from unofficial patch creator Wesp5 says the pair left the project before this. And yes, Schluter did switch company and country a little earlier, while Schwarzer remained at Paradox at least 4 months after. A 2021 blog post from writer Chris Avalon also said that none of the producers he knew at Paradox were still at the company in 2021. So maybe Paradox changed. In 2016, they were willing to take a chance on an ambitious RPG. At one point, they even created a new RPG segment within their publishing division. But success in other areas shifted their focus. The guy in charge of this RPG segment moved somewhere else, and the Paradox of 2020 were not willing to take a chance on an ambitious RPG that was now struggling, while a major pandemic added ever more uncertainty in the background. Most big-budget RPGs struggled in this period, even before COVID. And even the best took longer than expected, some to a much greater degree than this. And struggling games need someone to fight for them. Hardsuit Labs were a small studio tasked with creating a big game. A 4-year development is not outrageous. Kingdom Come Deliverance started in 2011, with a Kickstarter in 2014 and a release in 2018, and makes for an interesting comparison because I think Kingdom Come is the type of game Bloodlines 2 could have been. Janky, buggy, and unimpressive to reviewers, but committed to being a true RPG in a unique setting that the developers were passionate about. And Kingdom Come Deliverance did manage to impress fans and sell well, because despite what the gaming industry has long believed, there is an audience for good RPGs. There's no question whether this version of Bloodlines would ever have been some amazing Game of the Year contender. It never had the budget to be that to begin with, but it could have been a good RPG, with more time and support. Paradox were willing to spend another 4 years funding a new version of this game. How much money did that cost? And how much of that money would it have taken to turn the game they once had into a better game than the one they ended up with. Because this one doesn't exactly set a high bar. And if this original game was such an unmitigated disaster that it could never be salvaged, why did it take Paradox so long to realize that? They were the ones who gave this project to a small developer. They were the ones who thought it was good enough to show to the public with a release date. They were the ones who let whoever they claim was the problem be that problem. Publishers don't just exist to provide seed money and skim a little profit off the top. They're meant to do something. They're in charge of the project, and if that project was a disaster, that makes it their disaster. If they didn't want fans to be disappointed over this game's cancellation, they shouldn't have encouraged those fans to be excited in the first place. If they didn't want people to speculate about what happened, they should have provided an actual explanation. And if they didn't want the ghost of their cancelled game to haunt their new one, they should have made sure the new one was better than this. When Hard Suit's Bloodline was cancelled, the most common fan explanation was that they probably failed because they were a small studio that had never made an RPG before. Clearly, Paradox didn't think this was a problem though, because they turned around and gave the project to another small developer who had not only never made an RPG, but had never made anything but walking sims. Anytime Paradox talks about this, they make it sound as if they were just about to cancel this game, and then the Chinese room swooped in out of nowhere at the last second with a great vision they just had to get behind. But actually, Paradox were the ones approaching others, shopping for a new developer, and one company they approached was the Chinese room's parent company, Sumo Group. At the time, the Chinese room were in the process of scaling up and trying to get their first big action game off the ground. When they were told Bloodlines 2 was up for grabs, they jumped on the chance to work with the IP, which is what that action game became, and why not? It is a good IP, and why shouldn't they do what's best for them? But it was Paradox that agreed to this pitch over others, and it was Paradox that didn't care that it wasn't an RPG or faithful to the original, or maybe they chose the Chinese room precisely for that reason. It was also Paradox that once more expected a small studio to create a full-price game in just a few years. The Chinese room had 55 employees, but they numbered just 20 when they began, and in this time they worked simultaneously on Steel Wakes the Deep and its DLC. How could Paradox expect this studio to do such an ambitious project justice? But I suppose that's not a problem if doing it justice doesn't matter. And the Chinese room did at least inherit some assets. So let's talk about that. In a blog post announcing the project, a lead at the Chinese room talked about how important it was that they wrote their own story, which makes sense. So why is this game full of Hard Suit Labs characters? If writing your own story is so important, isn't that also true for creating your own characters? And why is this game set in Seattle? The original was in Seattle because that's where Hard Suit Labs were located. Write what you know. But the Chinese room are in England. Unless the priority was just making sure this game at least looked like the last game, so that whatever happened to the last game seemed less controversial. Some inherited features are even stranger. While playing this game, I couldn't understand what led to the mess that is Blood Resonance. And that's because this was part of the last version of the game, where characters actually needed to feed, and the type of blood they drank gave a temporary buff to their stats. This is also why a completely out-of-place damsel shows up. She was in one of the Hard Suit Labs trailers. I mean, aren't you happy, Bloodlines fans? It's the character from that game you like. Remember Game? Hey, why not spend £10 on a random assortment of junk for your apartment? It's junk from Game. Thank you, Paradox. It's so nice to know you care about honouring that game's legacy with useless, overpriced trash. But it is funny to see what genius ideas Paradox comes up with for DLC when there's no obvious way to milk something. Originally, 2 of this game's 6 clans were locked behind $30 Day 1 DLC, I cannot imagine what level of greed is required to think that is a good idea, or how clueless someone must be to not realize the backlash it would lead to would cost more money than it would make. And that is a major part of why this game is the way it is. Greed. This game feels like it's doing an impression of a AAA game, like an AI generating images of humans without understanding or caring how many fingers are meant to be on each hand. So much of this game is either inherited baggage or only seems to exist out of some obligation to a genre and title this game clearly doesn't actually want to be. There is a decent story and fun action combat here somewhere, if you're willing to overlook a lot. But I'm not. A long time ago, there was a great game that was sent out to die by its blood-sucking publisher. But it didn't die, because it was so damn good that it managed to live on in the shadows in a form of unlife. And it was so good that it would one day attract a new bloodsucker to swoop in and drain the life from it all over again. In the world of Vampire the Masquerade, diablerie is considered by many to be the worst thing a vampire can do. To drink of another's essence so entirely that nothing is left. But it's not Bloodlines 2 that's the diablerist here. It's not this game that marketed itself misleadingly. It's not this game that prevented a true sequel. And it's not this game that will prevent a Bloodlines 3. It's Paradox Interactive. Case closed. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is where I usually announce things, if I had something to announce, like streaming. I am still streaming. I streamed this game. You probably missed it. There was no streaming earlier this month because I was making this video, and there's no streaming for the rest of the month because I'm on holiday, but there will be streams, December probably, almost definitely, on Twitch and on YouTube on the second channel, not to be confused with the second channel because that's a different channel. There's also a Hades 2 video and an Expedition 33 video on that channel that you can watch, or you can just give me money on Patreon. I mean, if I can't interest you in any content, you could always just give me money. Take it or leave it, whatever.